Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. So, I know I'm a little bit delayed on my videos right now, a little bit behind on everything. I've been out of town, traveling, going to visit friends, spending time with my son. So I do apologize. I know I'm about 2 weeks late on this video, but I did want to go ahead and get this one going. So what we're going to be doing today, if you can't already tell, we're going to compare our prediction tier list that we made towards the end of season 2, beginning of season 3. We're going to compare that to what the specs are currently doing right now. All right, so starting off, let's talk about tanks. And actually, before I do that, um, I do want to say the left to right does not mean anything. It's just where they're ranking. Um, there is no left and right, better or worse in here. All right. So S tier is basically going to be they're pushing the higher end of keys. They're doing top damages, like pushing higher. They're just doing better, or excuse me, they're doing the best out of all the specs. A tier is going to be they're doing pretty good. They're pushing, but maybe there's some situations and circumstances that are pushing them to be better or to be worse. B tier is very average. They're not doing super great. They're not doing super terrible. They're just kind of they're there. Okay. C tier is going to be they're doing okay for your weekly keys, but they're not quite doing as good as some other specs, so maybe not the best option. And then we have our D tier and not played. D tier is going to be they're really rough to keep up with. They're very difficult to play. But overall, maybe you could, but it's not recommended. Not played is the absolute bottom of the barrel, total trash. Don't touch that spec. It is horrible. All right. So first, let's get into it. We'll start off with tanks. All right. So Blood DK. Right now, Blood is actually doing really, really well. So they got some changes. I believe it was like right before the point 0.5 patch or like 2 weeks before, something like that. They kind of got a little bit of a damage boost, and they also got a armor increase, which bumped them up. They were doing decent as long as you were coordinated, smart about your pulls, and you kind of had that perfect gameplay mentality. You could do well. Right now, we're actually seeing both of the hero talents are doing very well. Stan Lane is pretty much your group utility, and it's bringing kind of some more benefits, better survivability, definitely better for learning. And then you've got Deathbringer, which is doing better damage, and it's what most people are pushing keys with. Right now, they are actually doing pretty much 18s and 19s across the board for all blood DKs, which is actually really, really good compared to where they were. Um, I believe they were hard capped at 14s or 15s, so that's a 4 key jump just with those little buffs that they got. However, when we look at them compared to some of the other tanks and we look at the performance of these other tanks, they are still going to sit in the B tier. All right. That does not mean that they're unplayable. It doesn't mean that they're better or worse than the other specs. It just means they're not performing as well. All right. So they're pretty middle of the pack. You can definitely play them. You could keep up with them. They're going to do all right. All right, next up we have Brewmaster. So Brewmaster is actually in a pretty good place right now. They're definitely not top of the pack. I think that they're still very comp dependent, and I think that they're very healer dependent. And I think that's what's kind of holding them back. But we are seeing that they are pushing those higher keys. They are performing very, very well. They're also suffering from the fact that it's pretty much one hero talent being played right now, which does kind of hurt them a little bit. But overall, they're not the tankiest in the world, but they are doing very, very well, especially with melee comps. That's going to award them their A tier. So they are performing slightly above Blood, um, just in general with keys being pushed and all of that. All right, so next up we have Guardian Druid. So Guardian is actually surprisingly enough, it's in a pretty good place. They did get some buffs earlier in the patch. I don't think they got anything with the point 0.5 if I remember correctly, but they got some buffs to kind of just their damage. I think their tier set got a buff, and I think that they got some like passive buffs, which has definitely helped them out. They are definitely probably one of the more tanky, and they're definitely one of the best when it comes to self-sustain right now. So that's going to also get them in the A tier. All right. So Vengeance Demon Hunter. So Vengeance is in a very similar place to Blood and Guardian. All right. Right now, Vengeance is has really good self sustain. Both hero talents are viable and playable. There are 18, 19s, and 20s being done with both hero talents. However, they are running into an issue of when there's not very much coordination, they're not the best, and their defensives are not the strongest in the world when played incorrectly. And that is making pushing keys on them significantly more difficult. Um, but they're doing okay. They're able to kind of push these 19s across the board. I think there's one team, if I remember correctly, there's one team that is pushing above that, but it's not consistent. So, unfortunately, that is going to award them a B tier spot. All right. Now, one caveat with Vengeance, I will say, is if you have that coordinated group and if you are, kind of playing with some friends, you're doing your keys, they are a phenomenal tank and they could easily jump up into A or S. Um, but it's gonna end up being situational, and I think for just the average player, B tier is pretty much where Vengeance is gonna sit for right now. Okay. And then next up we have Prop Paladin. So Prop Paladin is a phenomenal tank. Definitely has earned its place in the S tier. They don't necessarily have the highest damage out of all the tanks, and they're not doing the best on that front. But with the amount of immunes that they have, the self sustain they have, the utility that they bring to the group, they are just outperforming. I would argue that they're outperforming every tank right now, and I think that they are really giving the best option when it comes to what tank should I play. I think Prop Paladin is a very good place for pretty much anybody right now. All right, so finally, for the tanks, we have our Protection Warrior. So Prot Warrior is pushing the high end of keys. It's currently the number one tank in the MDI right now, and overall, it's I believe doing the highest damage out of all tanks. It is doing the best performance overall. It does kind of lack utility, and doesn't really bring a lot to the group. But unlike Brewmaster, Prot Warrior has a lot of like variance in their comp, and that is pretty much what's pushing them up above everybody else, and that is going to award them their S tier spot. All right. So all in all, this is kind of where the tanks are sitting compared to our prediction. All right. So we obviously Prot Paladin and Prot Warrior was assuming both of them would be in the S tier. Brewmaster and Guardian. So I predicted Brewmaster would be an A tier, but Guardian I pictured in the B. I think that they would be a B tier tank if it weren't for the buffs. And then Blood we got right. As far as Vengeance goes, that is our big loss. So unfortunately, I think Vengeance just kind of needs something. I don't know what, but they need something. I don't know if it's like their tankiness, their self sustain. I really I don't know what it is. I've been playing a lot of Vengeance Demon Hunter lately, so I'm not 100% sure what they need, but there's something that they're just kind of missing that's preventing them from jumping up into these higher rankings right now. But let's go ahead and move into our healers. So first up, we have Discipline. Discipline is actually they're performing decent in keys. They're not super great. They're not super terrible. All in all, they're a solid healer choice, but they're not the best. They're not the worst. And compared to their performance compared to what the rest of the healers are doing right now, is actually going to put them in A tier. Like I said, they're not the best, they're not the worst. They're not at the bottom of the healers, they're not at the top of the healers, they're not middle. Like it's a very solid choice and it's a very good healer. I guess it could go situational, and I guess depending on what tank you pair it with could be the make or break point. I'm not really sure, but I think that when it comes right down to it, they're a good choice, but they're not the best choice. All right. So next up, let's talk about Holy Paladin. So Holy Paladin right now is actually they're doing pretty good. They're very good spot heals. They're very good in raids. The issue that they're running into, or at least from what I've noticed, Holy Paladin is running into this issue of big damage checks. A lot of times, what I've noticed is they don't have that group utility, or they don't have that group healing to keep up with some of the damage checks. And if they do, like they kind of have to stop everything and just focus on healing and keeping everybody alive. And they turn into like this ranged healer, and they have to be. And then you're using your cooldowns every damage check. And if you don't have a cooldown up for a damage check, then like you're stuck, and it's just not, overall not performing very well for some of the high damage checks. But I think in general they're very much a B tier healer. They're not terrible, they're not bad, they're not good. They're just kind of they're in the middle. They're doing okay when it comes right down to it. All right. So next up, let's talk about Holy Priest. So honestly, I have seen more Holy Priests this season than I think I've ever seen before. And it's insane to see how they're doing. But when we look at like overall performance, especially compared to some of these other healers and the way that some of these other healers are doing right now, Holy Priest, it doesn't really offer much to the group. They've got good spot healing. They've got good healing for these damage checks. They've got big cooldowns. They've got nice things. They're not cooldown reliant, but they have them if they need them. Like it's very, and overall, it's a very good healer. But unfortunately, like the performance that we're seeing, it's just not there, especially in these hierarchies. Holy priests are having a very difficult time keeping up with everything, and the big bursty damage seems to be getting them. They're good for the damage checks, they're good for like the spot heals, but like when things start getting bursty and it's like, oh, this person needs a heal, this person needs a heal, oh, big heals here, big group heals, they're very much struggling compared to some of these other healers, and so that is going to put them in the C tier of healers. All right, so oops. Next up, we have Mistweaver. So that's not good. All right. So Mistweaver is in general, they're doing okay. They're not outperforming anybody. They're not underperforming, but they're just kind of overall. They feel like it's a very weak healer. It's a very complex healer. But those that are playing Mistweaver right now seem to be doing okay, and they seem to be doing decent. But overall, compared to some of the other healers, they just feel very, very weak, and so it's going to put them in the B tier. All right. Preservation. So, okay, I think I've made my thoughts on Presevokers very, very clear. My unbiased opinion is it's the absolute worst healer in the game. Well, that's my biased opinion, not unbiased. But if we look at what Prez is doing right now, and if we look at the keys, then they are performing pretty well. I think that they're performing better with these melee comps than anything else. I don't like magic comps are just not for Presevokers. They're not going to perform very well there. And so just because they're being outperformed by pretty much everybody, the way that they heal and like the comp specificness that they need, it is going to put them into a C tier. All right. Could be worse. They're definitely doing better this season than probably ever before, but at the end of the day, they're not it's not a good healer spec. It's not doing very great at all. All right. So next up we have Resto Druid. So Resto is actually hitting the highest of high keys. They have great comp difference. They outperform almost every healer right now. Like big burst heals. They've got the damage checks. They've got the damage gain. Like they're doing very very good DPS right now, especially with the cat weaving. They're bringing an extra interrupt. They're bringing extra utility. Like they are just overall like Druid is insane right now in keys. All right, and that's gonna award them their S tier position. All right. Shaman, very much like Druid, they have so much utility. They have so much to offer the group. They're doing a lot. They have big bursty heals. They have sustained heals. Like, um, they're just doing amazing. I think the only issue that these two healers have is you have to be able to keep up with your mana, and I think that that comes down to a skill thing, not a class thing. So in general, those two are going to be our top healers. All right. So if we look at our healers, all right, so we have in our S tier, we have Resto and Resto, all right, which is pretty much what we were looking at. Discipline did drop a tier just because they're being outperformed by the utility of these two healers and the throughput that these two healers are offering. Um, Holy and Mistweaver we had in the B tier, so they kind of got that right. Definitely got Prez up from being not played to it's doing okay. It's just too comp specific, I think. And then Holy Priest dropping from the A tier. All in all, I think that Holy Priest is going to continue to run into this problem of survivability, and it's going to run into this problem of what are you actually giving my group? Because when it comes to discipline, you've got shields, You've got your raid buff, you've got your shields, you've got bursty heals, you've got spot heals, you've got um, the extra damage output that you're getting. Like discipline is just offering more to your group. No, it's not giving you an interrupt, but it's offering more to your group than what Holy is offering to the group. And so I think that until they balance that out, then I think that discipline will outshine it. And I think that Holy is going to really struggle to be a better healer and to maintain that A tier spot. All right. All right. So next up we have our melee DPS. All right. So arms. Oh, Lord. So we predicted arms to be a B tier, and it's actually sitting in the D tier. Arms is just the damage is just not there. It's being outperformed by both of its competitor specs. Overall, they're not pushing nearly as high keys. Arms is just not in a very good place right now. And I think that the reworks are not helping. But I think that in general, Arms is still probably 2 to 3% behind Fury. So I think that if there was going to be any competition to get Arms out of a D tier, then they would probably need like a at least a 3% damage buff. I think that's the only way that they would have any competition. And I think your execute builds are gone now. Your I'm trying to remember what the big played spec is right now, but I know that there's just a lot that is downhill for arms right now. They're just not doing great. All right. Assassination. So assassination has the group utility. They've got phenomenal group utility. They've got phenomenal um, damage. They're doing really well. We did predict them to be in the A tier. However, what we did not expect were the massive amounts of bugs that we are seeing with assassination, and I believe it's universal with all rogues right now. Okay. So unfortunately, assassination, just with those bugs and just with the way that things are playing out, and the fact that we're not running multiple poisons anymore because of the tier set, I think this tier set for Deathstalker is just absolutely horrible, and the fact that that is where you're getting your DPS, like it is just it's awful. But overall, the performance and the gameplay and what we're seeing, it is going to put them into the C tier. So we're a little bit off. I think performance wise, and the reason why I put them in the A tier to begin with, um, I think that all that's true. I just think there's too many bugs, and I think this tier set is just betraying us a lot more than what was expected. All right. Whew. Outlaw. Okay. So we predicted Outlaw to be in the A tier, and we were very, very close. It's being used a lot more than what most of the other rogue specs are being used. I think because it's the least most reliant on stealth, I think is one of the reasons why. I think that the changes and the reworks that it got has it doing very, very well right now. Um, and so I think that overall it's performing kind of average. So we're gonna put it in the B tier. A tier below what we actually thought it was going to be. I expected there to be a lot more damage coming from rogues than what we're actually seeing. Especially the sustain with assassination and the outlaw that they have. I think that in general there are too many bugs and they're not doing enough damage to maintain those A tier spots that we thought. All right. Next up, we have elemental. So or excuse me, enhancement. Enhancement is just it's really struggling right now. It's not doing as much damage. It is still probably one of the most complex specs in the game. But overall, it's doing average. It's still shaman utility. It's still bringing all the same things that you would get from a normal shaman. However, it's just not doing super great compared to the other shaman specs and some of the other specs in the game. Whew. All right. So we did predict it to be an A tier, but shaman was kind of giga looking like a whew, last season, and now it's kind of balancing out. All right, so next, Feral Druid. So I predicted Feral would be in the C tier. It kind of sits in the middle of the pack, that C and B tier. Doesn't get played a lot. However, we saw Balance really struggling at the beginning of the season, and we saw a rise in Feral Druids. And Feral is actually doing really, really well right now. It is um, just because of the way you're doing your melee comps, Pharaoh Druid is actually being taken over a Resto Druid in a lot of different melee comps and in some magic comps too. The bite damage, the bleed damage, like everything that they're giving your group, it is just amazing to see how it's working out. And we're actually probably for the first time in at least this expansion, we're seeing Feral sitting in the A tier. It is outperforming a lot of different specs, and it is just doing slightly better. I believe there's even one group, I'd have to pull it up and look, but I believe there's one group that is running a Feral Druid over a Rogue spec, right? So they're, if I remember correctly, they have like a Shaman Healer, a Feral Druid, a Havoc Demon Hunter, and a Frost Death Knight instead of your Death Knight and your Warrior and your Rogue for your DPS, and then getting your raid buff from the Druid, either the tank or the healer. So it's kind of interesting to see a lot more people giving Feral a chance, and I'm honestly very happily wrong about this one. Okay. Now, moving on to Frost Death Knight. So, Frost Death Knight, to nobody's surprise, after their rework and after the changes, they're in S tier. All right. In general, Frost or Unholy seems to be the king this expansion. This is a very big Death Knight expansion from what I'm noticing. We definitely saw Frost take off in season one. It was expected that Blood was going to take off in season two and ended up being Unholy. And now here we are in season three, and Frost is taking over. All right, so I do remember talking about Frost and Unholy. I know we put Unholy pretty low, but we had Frost in the A tier because they were looking good coming out of that rework, and I did say that there's a very good chance that they could end up being in the S tier. So overall, I'm not even upset. Kind of happily surprised compared to some of these other specs that we see. All right. Next up, we have Fury Warrior. So Fury Warrior is actually like it is doing some insane damage. It is definitely being taken in almost every physical comp, with the exception of onesie twosies that are running a Prot Warrior tank, just because there's no reason to stack. In raids, Fury is definitely your chosen warrior buff. So overall, Fury is definitely earned its place in the S tier. Um, Again, it is going to be a situational whether you take a Fury or whether you take somebody else. If you're running a Prot Warrior, you're probably not going to take a Fury Warrior. But if you're running Guardian Druid or if you're running a Brewmaster, I mean, honestly, I could even see a Fury Warrior running with a Vengeance as well. All right. So overall, doing very, very well. Next up, oh wow, I put them in the C tier over here. Woo, that is rough. All right. But next up we have Havoc. So Havoc we definitely predicted was going to be doing very, very well. Is a big determining factor for S or A on Havoc was going to be Vengeance. And what we're actually seeing is there were a couple of groups that for a while they were stacking Demon Hunters. So they and I believe there is still one comp that is actually stacking their Vengeance and Havoc together. But what we're seeing is Havoc is doing some insane numbers. They could very easily rival Death Knights, Frost Death Knight. I think that Frost just brings a little bit better utility, and so that's why they're being chosen. However, overall, Havoc has earned its place in the S tier, and I think that it is doing phenomenal. Especially if you run a Brewmaster tank, a Resto Druid, a Feral Druid, a Fury Warrior, and a Havoc Demon Hunter. I think that you could definitely go far with that group. And I'm sure that there are groups out there running that comp or very similar to it and are actually excelling on most of these keys. Okay. So next up we have Ret Paladin. Red is actually in a really good place right now. They're doing pretty good numbers. Um, Compared to where they were at the start of the season. They're bringing a lot of utility. They're doing very, very well. Overall, compared to what they were looking like at the start of the season, they have earned their place in the A tier. Just the utility, the damage, all of it combined is putting them slightly above everybody else, and they're in a really good place right now. All right, so next up we have Survival Hunter. All right, so Survival as predicted, is going to end up in the C tier. They're just being outperformed by every other hunter spec, and they're not really comparable to some of these other DPS. All right. Um, so Sub Rogue. Sub Rogue, so they're very bursty in their damage, but they're not really doing so well at the sustain, which is kind of taking them out of the raid, and it makes them good in keys with like big pulls, as long as that pull is lasting. But I think that sub is just going to end up sitting in the middle of the pack. It's kind of a B tier. It's not great. It's not terrible. It's kind of there. They definitely have a stealth dependency, which I think that will always prevent them from being an A tier or better because at the end of the day, sub is just, or excuse me, rogue is good, but if you're constantly relying on being able to stop and go into stealth, you're going to get outperformed by a lot of different people and really by every other DPS, whether it's in your class or in the other classes. All right. Next up, we have Unholy. So, Unholy is definitely being outperformed by Frost. They're not as bad as it was at the beginning of the season, but they're still not great. They are going to end up sitting in a C tier spot. They're just slightly below what these other specs are seeing, and they're just not. They're doing well, but they're not doing like super great. All right. And last but not least, we have Windwalker. So Windwalker is struggling from the same thing that they struggle with every season: the AOE caps, the scaling and how their damage works, their way of doing DPS, kind of the talent builds and how it's being played. They're just kind of struggling, but they're not terrible. They're not great. They're very middle of the pack. So I'm definitely keeping them in the B tier. And I think that if we could get rid of this 5 target hard cap on like 90% of their abilities, I think I think that would do very, very, very good for them. Um, I think if the tank is pulling around what the Windwalker can do, then you will definitely be able to see them pump, but I think that without like specific pre-planned pulls and everything, Windwalker is just not going to excel. All right. So next up we have Affliction Warlock. So Affliction is going to join arms in the D tier. The way that Vile Taint works, it doesn't work. You either lose DPS because you're reapplying your agony, or you lose DPS because your agony fell off. So like either way, I think it's every like 18 seconds or something like that. You're losing damage, and I mean it's just not playing very well. The way that it's built, it's just overall it is just not doing super great. I think that it could definitely be better. and I think that the rework in Midnight might give a better take on Affliction, but I think right now it's being outperformed by everybody because there's so much of a damage loss. I think that in raid they have potential to be doing very well, but at the same time, like then there's some other issues with the spec in general, even on single target, and dots just are not enough to sustain all of that damage. All right. So next up we have Arcane, which to nobody's surprise is going to sit in the S tier. They are maintaining their spot where they've pretty much been for most of the expansion. I think there was one point where they dropped off into the A tier to be outperformed by Fire Mage for a little bit. But overall, Arcane is actually doing phenomenal. It's been a good spec. They got some changes that we half expected them to go down, but then they ended up holding on. So in general, they're performing very well in the S tier. All right. Okay. Next up we have Og. So we predicted Og to be a B tier just because they did get some damage buffs. They did get some things that were going to help them, but it just didn't pan out, and they are being outperformed by even Prez evokers are outperforming augmentation evokers. This spec is still, I'm not going to say it's a dead spec. It's still pretty much a dead spec though. It does have some gameplay. You can still get that 3K rating, but even still, like it's just not. It's not super great. All right. Next up, we have Balance. So Balance received some pretty good buffs. They got some pretty good changes, and all in all, it has bumped them into the A tier. I think without those buffs and changes, we would definitely still have them in the C tier, potentially even the D tier. But I think that with the changes that came, that is really what bumped them up. All right. Um, and overall, they're doing well. I still would not necessarily say they're the best, but they're also not the worst. And they have enough utility to be better than just everybody else. All right. Next up is Beast Mastery, which probably to nobody's surprise, we have Beast Mastery going into the S tier. So Beast Mastery is just doing some insane damage, the ability to constantly stay moving, traps, everything that Hunter utility brings is just outperforming everybody, and they are just doing absolutely phenomenal as a Hunter spec goes. All right. Devastation Evoker. So Devastation is just kind of it's there. They have some pretty good damage. They're not the best, they're not the worst, and that is going to earn them their B tier spot. I think that in the right hands, Devastation could definitely outperform a lot of these S tier specs and A tier specs. But I think that the average player is not going to be able to do that, and that is what we're seeing. Is most of these people are just sitting in the middle of the pack, not better than everybody else, not worse than everybody else. They're just kind of in the middle there. All right. So next up, we have our Destruction Warlock. Destruction is going to earn itself a tier position, primarily because the damage that they're doing, both single target and AOE, is just off the wall. I believe we're going to see some of them in the MDI. Um, Potentially that will be the Warlock spec that is taken. All right. So overall, like they're performing very very well. But unfortunately, Warlock utility is just not enough to move it above the A tier, and their damage is not doing enough to warrant swapping them out with one of these S tier specs. All right. Demonology, on the other hand, they're not doing great. They're not doing terrible. They're kind of in the middle of the pack. They're just average, right? Um, which I think is interesting because uh, I expected Demonology and Destruction to both be B tiers throughout the whole season. Like I was watching it, I was like, dang, yeah, they're probably they're B tier, they're B tier, they're B tier, and I was looking everything up, and I was like, wow, Destruction is actually doing significantly better, and like their damage is just better. So that ended up bumping them into the A tier. Overall, they kind of have the same utility, but the damage profile on Destruction is going to be slightly better. All right, next up we have Elemental Shaman, which probably, to nobody's surprise, is going to be an S tier spec as well. They have amazing AoE. It is out of this world the amount of damage that an Elemental Shaman can do, especially when it's bursting, compared to when it is compared to like single target, like they're just sustained. They're just doing very very well. I also think it's interesting how when we talked about elemental and enhancement, we said one of them could go up or down. It just kind of depended on like resto and like I didn't want to put him in S tier, but I didn't want to put him in B tier. I want kind of waiting and see, and we end up seeing that exact shift. So I think it's interesting to see how just like a little bit of tuning and a little bit of changes can do um interesting things for different specs. All right, so next up we have Fire Mage. Fire is actually doing the worst out of all the mage specs right now. Its performance is not there, its damage is not there. It still has mage utility, but overall it's just not doing very well, and it's going to earn itself a C tier position. All right. Frost, on the other hand, is doing okay. I think their damage is slightly better. Their utility is okay. I think Frost is definitely probably the squishiest of the mage specs right now. And I would also say that Frost just does not have the same AoE. But overall, it's doing okay. And I would say that Frost Mage is probably going to sit in the B tier as well. All right. So next up, we have Marksmanship. So Marksmanship Hunter it's doing really well. It's doing okay. But it's being outperformed right now, and its damage is not comparable to what Beast Mastery is, and so it's gonna earn itself a B tier position. Um, I think that marksmanship has the potential to be better. I think BM has just got the better damage profile and it's got the better utility, just slightly maybe. But I would say either one of them is a good option. But just because of the higher damage and because of like being outperformed, marksmanship has fallen from A into B just by a little bit. All right. Next up, we have Shadow Priest. Shadow Priest is actually doing pretty good. We kind of expected it to be a little bit better. Given the changes that came to discipline, I kind of expected Shadow to be an S or an A tier. Turns out they're going to be a B tier. Good utility. They offer a lot to the group. However, at the end of the day, they're just their damage isn't quite there and their performance isn't quite there compared to what we're seeing from some of these other specs. But there you have it. That is your updated tier list for everybody's stance. For the stances of the classes at the 0.5 patch. I know, like I said, I'm a little bit late. I apologize for that. But this is where we went right. This is where we went wrong. Kind of see our comparison and also see where everybody's at. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Like, subscribe, tell me what you guys think in the comments. Yes, you are allowed to make fun of me. But at the end of the day, hope you guys liked the video, and I will see you all in the next one. Which, on that note, before I end this video, for those of you who have stuck around, I want you all to know I am in the process of doing some things. I'm trying to get some videos put together. I'm trying to get interesting things, and I think it's going to be good. So this may end up being the last video for a couple of days, just because of the editing process and because of how long everything takes me to get both recorded and then edited. Please bear with me if the channel kind of goes dark for a little bit. I will also be trying to get some raid fights videos posted and some keys. Hopefully going to be able to get some streams in as well. So we'll have to wait and see what happens. But just know, got a couple of interesting videos, big videos that I am thinking people will enjoy and appreciate based off some feedback I've gotten on other videos. So, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Stick around, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Later.